I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics, Messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider. This is your theology and news roundup for April the 16th, 2025. We do have some important material to go through, but I'd first like to make a few announcements. Please, if you have not already, go to the Messianic Apologetics website. Here in the right-hand column, you'll see blog notifications. Be automatically notified by email when Messianic Apologetics is updated. You can just put your email on there, subscribe. It will ask you to confirm. This is different than our email update list, which you can subscribe to here with the envelope icon. We are reintroducing new articles, new materials to the website every day. If you want to know what's being posted or reposted, blog notifications is the way to do it. Also, and I mentioned this yesterday, as we go 5 times a week now with Messianic Insider, please do feel free to comment live when we are having our show. There is a feature with the software where I can answer questions live. Now, I know for many of you, you're going to be watching or listening to this after it has broadcast. Do not hesitate to post questions to YouTube, Facebook, X, or Twitter. And if those questions are significant enough, we can incorporate a section where we will address them. So please do keep that in mind. All right, we do make reference to different publications and resources on our episodes. And some of you all know about the recent audit our ministry had to go through behind the scenes. There was some website remodeling. I know when I make reference to a book here or a book there, some of you all may have difficulty finding it. Go to MessianicApologetics.net and you'll see this tab right here called Publications. There's a direct link to the Outreach Israel bookstore, but more than anything else, all of our ministry publications, Messianic Helper Series, books by Mark Huey, books by J.K. McKee, that's me, scripture commentaries, they are all listed. And you just click there and it will take you to the Outreach Israel bookstore, which you can also just access directly. That's outreachisraelbookstore.com. All right, time to get started on our theology roundup. And our subject matter for today is whether or not the resurrection of the dead, the doctrine of resurrection, was something which came late in Second Temple Judaism. Now, our ministry does have a resource which covers a lot of this called Messianics and the Afterlife. It was released last year. It's a combination of some of the things we released previously on the intermediate state between death and the resurrection, eternal punishment, as well as some new FAQ entries and essays. So Messianics and the Afterlife, extensive resource. It's available in both paperback and ebook for Amazon Kindle. So I highly recommend, if you have not already, please do add this to your library. Now, along with that, our discussion today has a lot of references taken from our ministry frequently asked question entry. So MessianicApologetics.net. You can see it here. Click on FAQs. These are all listed in alphabetical order. So go down to resurrection. So the letter R, scroll down all the way. See, resurrection, late belief. Is it or is it not true that the doctrine of resurrection developed rather late in Judaism? So click there. This will take you to a PDF file. Resurrection, late belief. So I know, and this is rather short. This is only 2 pages. I know some of you all are not that familiar with this discussion, but it's actually very important because when you get into more technical theological resources, not only Christian, but also Jewish, you might hear it espoused that the doctrine of resurrection, something which is absolutely imperative to our faith as Bible believers, came rather late in the scope of things. And I would not be surprised if you have never heard this mentioned or discussed at your local Messianic congregation or synagogue. Today's Messianic community, and you know I love you, but does not easily handle beliefs or proposals from those on the theological left, be it Christian or even Jewish, very well. And one of the things you will encounter in a lot of Jewish theological materials, introductory books on Judaism, those written, yes, from a conservative standpoint, but most especially from a Reform standpoint, you will hear it concluded that the doctrine of resurrection was very late in the development of Jewish tradition, Jewish theology. Is the doctrine of resurrection late to Judaism? Now, this week, in both the Christian as well as Messianic worlds, the resurrection of Yeshua the Messiah is going to be remembered as well as discussed. Okay, so regardless of where some people stand regarding Good Friday or Easter Sunday, we are, as Messianics in the Passover season, hopefully you have discussed the resurrection of Yeshua in some way. The doctrine of resurrection was essential to first century Pharisaism. Remember what the Apostle Paul said in his defense before the Sanhedrin in the book of Acts. I am a Pharisee and am on trial for what? The resurrection of the dead. The Pharisees absolutely affirmed the doctrine of resurrection. And with that, the doctrine of resurrection was absolutely vital to the first century Messianic movement. It set it apart decisively from Greco-Roman paganism, which believed what? Greco-Roman paganism advocated either the release of the soul from the prison of the body upon time of death. So many Greeks and Romans believed that the human soul was trapped in the prison of the body. It looked at death as a good thing. The soul would escape the prison of the body at time of death. Or many Greeks and Romans, especially Epicureans, believed that after death, you just entered into personal oblivion. So you had one shot at life. Epicurean philosophy was because there was no afterlife or existence after death, you just needed to pleasure it up as much as possible because when you're dead, you're dead. So the doctrine of resurrection stood decisively against that. Human remains are one day going to be reanimated to new life. And the human person would exist in a permanently embodied, immortal condition. The doctrine of future resurrection is to be something foundational to our faith as believers in Yeshua. While many would affirm that after death, and this includes me, that the immaterial consciousness of a human being would be transferred to another dimension, i.e., heaven or hell, temporarily, what we would commonly refer to as the intermediate state, what happens between death and resurrection. They would still affirm how the ultimate intention of God is to see one's mortal remains reanimated to life, and human beings exist in a permanently embodied immortal condition. The widespread teaching throughout both Jewish and Christian history is that when a human being dies, his or her immaterial consciousness goes to another dimension temporarily, and then at the resurrection, that consciousness will be rejoined or reunited with one's reanimated mortal remains, and the man or woman will exist in a permanently embodied immortal condition, as opposed to dying and just having one's soul float off to heaven for eternity. That means that a cemetery gravesite is not the end. Within a great deal of theology, while the ancient Pharisees affirmed the resurrection and the Sadducees quantitatively denied it, many liberal examiners actually conclude that the doctrine of resurrection was late to Judaism. And many liberal examiners, be they Jewish or Christian, conclude that the doctrine of resurrection is something which actually originated during the 2nd century BCE Maccabean crisis. Because you look at 1st and 2nd Maccabees in the Apocrypha, especially 4 Maccabees in the Apocrypha, you see some very developed views of death, intermediate state, afterlife, and even eternal punishment. So a lot of progressive theologians conclude, this is not just on the Christian side, also the Jewish side, that the doctrine of resurrection came rather late to Second Temple Judaism. Now, how many Tanakh passages, Old Testament passages, decisively speak of a future resurrection of individual persons in the future? Now, Daniel 12:2 would be one of them. Let's go back to the FAQ entry briefly here. Yes, Daniel 12:2 says, many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake, these to everlasting life, but the others to disgrace and everlasting contempt. New American Standard. That unambiguously affirms that in the future, there will be a reanimation of individual persons in a resurrection. Other passages, however, have been interpreted as speaking more of a national restoration of Israel. So here, for example, Isaiah 26:19 or Ezekiel 37:6. Your dead will live, their corpses will rise. You who lie in the dust, awake and shout for joy, for dew is as the dew of the dawn, and the earth will give birth to the departed spirits. Isaiah 26:9. I will put sinews on you, make flesh grow back on you, cover you with skin, and put breath in you, that you may come alive, and you will know that I am the Lord. Ezekiel 37:6, both from the New American Standard. Frequently, those are not taken as speaking of a resurrection of individual persons in the future. Rather, they're taken solely as being references to the restoration of Israel. Now, the Sadducees, among others, denied the doctrine of resurrection because, according to them, they could not see it in the Torah, the only scriptures they accepted, whereas the Pharisees accepted a much wider canon of Hebrew scripture, the prophets and the writings. Now, are there hints and clues of a future resurrection of the dead seen throughout a great deal of the Tanakh? Absolutely, including some of those passages I just read. And this is actually no different than seeing hints and clues of a Messiah figure to come. Yet, I do think it is fair to recognize that, for example, just as the effects of the two exiles to Assyria and Babylon would have really honed faithful Jews to consider the expectations of a Messiah figure. Because after all, God promised King David that his throne would be occupied in perpetuity. But yet, as a consequence of the exile, the Davidic throne was vacant. So because of that, those who returned from the exile, faithful Jews would have to consider, how is this going to be resolved? And hence, ideas of messianism, a Messiah figure to come, would be focused in on. So too, in that same line of reasoning, did various trials and catastrophes focus Second Temple Judaism to really sort through some of the specifics of a future resurrection of the dead? The development of a specific doctrine of resurrection occurred at the same time as the development of messianism, a Messiah figure to come. And I think we often don't recognize that. And frequently, whether it be in the scriptures or even in our own lives, various dramas, various catastrophes get people to focus in on, what is God's plan for history? What are we detecting in his word? What is God trying to communicate to me in this seeming disaster or this seeming crisis? Throughout the apostolic writings, the doctrine of resurrection is unambiguously affirmed, given the centrality of what? Yeshua's resurrection from the dead. And while Yeshua's resurrection doubtlessly affects personal eschatology, what's going to happen to me in the future after I die? And what does it mean for me to be resurrected in the future? The future resurrection is not just about us as individuals. It's also tied to future events, namely Yeshua's return, his second coming, the restoration of Israel's kingdom, the future millennial kingdom, and the subsequent eternal state. So I hope this gives you some very important things to factor into your discussions and future studies. Doctrine of resurrection, absolutely important. It was developed much more specifically within the world of Second Temple Jewish Pharisaism, and it is from that that the first century Messianic movement picked up most of its essential theology. Okay, so we do have one comment here. Okay, somebody saying hello. We won't post that. But we do encourage you to post comments, give us some feedback, and hopefully we can pick up on that as we have weekly, daily episodes of Messianic Insider. All right, so that concludes our theology roundup for today. Now we get to move on to the news roundup. Now, the news, which we'll be going through today, most of this involves things I have encountered passively on social media. So mainly X, or formerly Twitter, Instagram, possibly Facebook. Sometimes one of you will send me an article to look at and review. All right, so we are, of course, in the season of Passover. This is from the 10th of April, so this is from last week, but this was something important I thought we should review. It's from One for Israel, and they ask, if you are familiar with the Passover story, you will know that the killing and eating of lambs is pretty central. So you might be surprised to hear that you won't usually see lamb on the table at your average Jewish Passover Seder. Why is that? Anyone who's been involved in the Messianic community for any period of time knows that customarily Ashkenazi Jews will not eat lamb during the Passover Seder. There will be a lamb shank bone on the Passover plate, but they will not eat lamb. And it goes back to how do you properly recognize the sanctity of the lamb for the Passover sacrifice? There's no longer a temple in Jerusalem. And so to avoid some of the controversy which may exist at an Ashkenazi Passover Seder, you'll instead frequently see poultry or something like brisket eaten. And a great number of Messianic Jewish congregational Passover Seders, usually held at a large hotel and it'll be catered, you will have chicken, but that has to do more with the cost of the Passover Seder. And our family has been involved in helping facilitate large congregational Seder events with several hundred people. I actually think that's a fatality now of the pandemic because it can be very expensive. But yeah, the reason there would be a chicken dinner, rubber chicken dinner at a hotel has to do with the cost. But in the Sephardic Jewish tradition, you may see a lamb dinner served during the Passover Seder. And there are many Messianic Jewish congregations, usually those which host their own Seder at their own congregational facility, which will have lamb. Now, this past week, Sunday evening, when we had our home Seder with our Messianic Jewish friends, we had brisket. And I got to try out a customary dinner brisket recipe, but I did it on the smoker and it was a huge hit. And actually, one of the challenges we have in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, as many of you all out there in North America do as well, how do you find lamb which is not halal? Now, I actually did the other day go to our local HEB, which has a section called for Crescent Foods, but they had HEB lamb, which was not halal, which I was rather relieved about. But usually the reason why lamb is not served at many Passover Seders, especially those in the Ashkenazic tradition, is to give due honor to how there is no more temple where a lamb can be sacrificed, a temple in Jerusalem. But the sacrifice of the lamb is instead honored with the placement of the shank bone on the Seder plate. Okay, moving on to our next story. This is from April the 9th, but this guy, Bruce Mejia of the Instagram channel Wild Olive Tree, he's getting a lot of traction out on social media. And he is somebody who unambiguously believes in supersessionism or replacement theology. And here he talks about how dispensationalism is a false doctrine made to promote the political ideology of Zionism. Now, he believes that all Christians are the true Jews and ethnic Jewish people, descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they are the synagogue of Satan. And he believes that dispensationalism was behind the political ideology of Zionism, the founding of the state of Israel. And I would not be surprised if he believes that the state of Israel, he doesn't say it here, was a satanic counterfeit, and that the true Israel, the kingdom of God, makes up the Christian church. But his beliefs are getting a lot of traction on social media. Of course, anyone who looks at the development of Zionism knows that there were many Christian groups in the early 19th century, even in the 18th century, completely independent of figures like Schofield, Darby, and others who were behind formulating dispensationalism, who anticipated a return of the Jewish people to the Holy Land in the end times, in the days leading up to the Messiah's return. But Bruce Mejia is a real piece of work, and we just have to stay up to date with some of the things he's doing. This will not be the last time we look at him. And actually, earlier, was it in the fall, I think, we addressed some of the things he said about the parable of the vineyard. Okay, Jonathan Cahn. This is from April the 14th, so 2 days ago, on his Instagram channel, where he talks about toxic masculinity. Jonathan Cahn unveils how Hollywood movies and culture have been degrading men through the words toxic masculinity. And Jonathan Cahn actually raises a number of important points. The first thing he raises is, okay, so society, culture is out there attacking men, using terminology like toxic masculinity. This is something which eventually is going to be turned onto women, because once you degrade men and men have to suffer, eventually women are going to suffer as well. But he also talks about how both manhood and womanhood have been negatively affected by what? The fall and sin. And yet, biblical manhood, biblical womanhood are in and of themselves good things. And I really appreciated that. He talked about the interconnectivity of the genders, and he raised some points which you don't often see in the discussion of the attack on men. It's something which eventually affects everyone. Now, one of the things which often does not get discussed in this debate, and that leads us to this resource, which was released in 2023. I recommend that you read it. It's called the title is Non-Toxic Masculinity, Recovering Healthy Male Sexuality by Zachary Wagner. One of the major reasons why there is a huge attack on men today, and you see labels like toxic masculinity, is because of the fact that this is a huge response to centuries of men denigrating women, men treating women as inferiors, often using various Bible passages to assert male primacy, male superiority. And now, with some of the changes which have taken place in Western society, definitely over the past century and a half, now women, many women, are getting back at them. That's something which needs to be recognized, and it's not good. We don't need to have a battle of the sexes. We need to recognize how both male and female have been negatively affected by the fall. Both male and female are equal before the God of creation. Men and women do have their anatomical differences. They have different reproductive anatomy, but men and women both have the same amount of intellectual capacity and brain power. Okay, another article. This is from the Gospel Coalition, their Twitter or X account from yesterday. It's a good article. You should be able to read through pretty quickly. As marriage rates decline, should pastors encourage singles to marry? Now, the Gospel Coalition is broadly complementarian, but it's rather refreshing to see a complementarian source say that and conclude that, look, both heterosexual marriage and singleness, neither one is better than the other in the eyes of God. Both have their advantages and disadvantages. There are many men today, as well as women today, who, because of the way the world is, they are unable to find an acceptable spouse, a qualified spouse. That does not make them pariahs in the kingdom of God. Of course, there's a lot of discussion here about the Apostle Paul, his status, 1 Corinthians chapter 7. It's no surprise why this is not the kind of article you're going to see. This is not the kind of perspective you're going to see discussed in much of today's Messianic community. Although many people, given the small size of the Messianic community, many young people do wonder, am I ever going to be married? Because I'm part of this small group and there's a very inadequate selection of other singles. And so this is something worthwhile to look through. This is not the last time we're going to discuss this. Okay, from Charisma. This is from yesterday, April the 15th. End times red flag. Are we now living in the days of Noah? And this was very interesting, referencing some of the views of author and researcher L.A. Marzulli. Says modern science is reviving the sins of Genesis 6, warning that current advances in gene editing may be fulfilling Jesus's prophecy that the last days would be as it was in the days of Noah. And to summarize, citing Matthew 24 and the extra-biblical book of Enoch, Marzulli linked contemporary genetic experiments, including the attempted resurrection of extinct species, to the actions of fallen angels before the flood. He says, we know the fallen angels sinned against the animal kingdom. Read the book of Enoch. That's why you know, folks, if you were going to keep one book out of people's hands, out of the seminaries, oh, don't read Enoch. Now, look, I don't know how to take some of these conclusions. I do believe that from Genesis 6, there were fallen angels who cohabitated with human females and produced a hybrid race of giants called the Nephilim. Regarding Yeshua's statement in his Olivet Discourse that the days before his return would be as the days of Noah, are you going to see a return of the Nephilim? Possibly. I don't know. I've always considered that to be a wild card. But then there are people who then start extrapolating that and associate it with wild genetic experimentations, strange technologies, etc. Now, I'm not here to say those are a problem. Those are a problem. But how much of it is connected to Genesis 6? And then, of course, statements made or not made in texts like the book of Enoch, I don't know. But we are here in our theology and news roundup to pay attention to these things and note potential issues. Okay, here's an interesting one which came across my path from an X channel by Adine. And he has this map of the land of Israel with different colors circled around. He said, if you are a Palestinian who claims that your ancestors came from the red area, they probably came in the 7th to 10th century and forcibly converted some Samaritans to Islam. If you are from the blue area, they probably settled after the Crusader period in the 13th to 17th century. If from the orange zone, they fled sectarian conflicts in Lebanon in the 18th to 19th century. If you were from the green area, you were here because the Zionists gave them a job. So, you see a lot of discussions right now that the state of Israel is a European colonization project, but a lot of the Arabs who are from the land of Israel, what they would call Palestine, they have not been there for multiple millennia. A lot of them are, their ancestors came much later than they purport. Anyway, that's something good I think something important to keep in mind. All right, our next story. This is from Not the Bee, and this is also from our backyard here in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. I'm going to turn this. Okay, Ed Young of Prestonwood Baptist Church, wanting to talk about Is Your Life a Roller Coaster? He actually is introduced on stage on a roller coaster. And I'm not even going to ask how much it costs Prestonwood to rent that. But the statement is, if your church doesn't do this, is it even a church? Of course, that's said sarcastically. Yeah, that's just absolute ridiculous. And somebody actually says below, so this is not an SNL skit. I've been working my way back to faith after 30 years of agnosticism to find this. How do these people take themselves seriously? How do they reconcile their quote-unquote experience with that of the brutalized Jesus and martyred apostles? Okay, two more stories. This is something which is circulating all over X right now. The American Empire Must Fall, spoken in Dearborn, Michigan. And this is from two people who are certainly, one of them is an obvious Muslim. The lady there appears that she's been influenced by this. Americans need to understand how common these sentiments are within our own borders. These are people who are advocating the downfall of Western civilization, and the right to free speech has apparently given them that ability here on American soil. So there are a lot of other things which, of course, are taking place right now in the West. You've seen me post some things even from the state of Texas, different Islamicist groups coming in. They're buying up land. Recently, there was a big Islamic event held at all places, South Fork Ranch. Some of you all know the TV series Dallas from the 1970s, 1980s. Right, and they said J.R. Ewing would be, incensed to know that this was taking place at his family's compound. Yeah, this is something which is very disconcerting. Okay, and then finally, and this is from yesterday from the Epoch Times, U.S. President Donald Trump blamed former U.S. President Joe Biden, Russian President Vladimir Putin, and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky on Monday for the continuing war in Ukraine, saying it's not his war and vowing once again to bring it to a swift end. And I stand by the president. I know that there are many people in today's Messianic community who have family ties in both Ukraine and Russia, and so that's why other Messianics have been very careful to say anything about it because of those connections. And there's a huge Messianic community in both Ukraine as well as Russia. But we need to be praying for peace, an honorable peace. We also need to be praying that this can conclude and the truth can come out regarding how this thing even started. All right, so that kind of concludes we do have some feedback in the comment section, but we'll probably go through that tomorrow because this is new for a lot of people. Okay, so that concludes our news session for today. I hope our discussion, particularly on whether or not the doctrine of resurrection was late to Judaism, is something you found helpful. And when this episode is archived on MessianicApologetics.net, you can go through all of the links and news stories and look through them for yourself. As always, on behalf of Outreach Israel Ministries and Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your continued prayers, encouragement, and donations toward all of our ministry efforts. I especially would like to thank those of you who have been led to give a special Passover offering. We really appreciate everything you do for us. We'll see you again tomorrow with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you, shalom, and take care.